Welcome to the Thought Balloons podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Folsham. With me today is a good friend of mine, Dion Westford, an RPG enthusiast and Twitch streamer. Welcome to the show, Dion.
Hi, glad to be here. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Woke up about an hour and a half ago because insomnia and just bad sleeping habits in general. Took a nap last night and I woke up at like 4 in the morning and I went back to sleep at like 10 in the morning. So
Yeah.
it's how we do. But I've
And
already slammed a can of cola into my fucking face, and I'm on number two, which is bad for my health, but
mm,
I need caffeine somehow.
yeah, I made two coffees in one this morning to get myself going. I was supposed to wake up at, I told you, I was gonna get up at like 10 and try and have like a full morning to myself. That didn't
Mhm.
happen.
No.
No, I stayed in bed until like 1 after 1. It was a
Nice.
mess. I was a mess. But I'm here.
Yeah. I woke up just slightly after 3. So it's a mood for sure. As I told, I'm trying to get Dodgy Paper on the podcast, and he lives in Melbourne, Australia, and I told
Oh
him like,
God.
hey man, if you like live a normal life and like wake up in the morning and stuff, like in your neck of the woods, I could do any time during the day because basically like I'm living in Australia right now. Like,
Because you're up all night.
well, yeah, like I told him it was like basically anytime between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. Melbourne, I'm awake, which is like freaking what, like 3 p.m. to like 6 a.m. like here in PA or something like that.
Mm.
It's bad. It's bad. I really need to correct these things. Oh. But anyway, we're not here to talk about my sleep pattern. We're here to talk about things that you're interested in. And one thing that we are both interested in is RPGs, Dungeons and Dragons, but also various tabletop role playing games, video RPGs, things like that. G- uh, Before we like get into the real nitty gritty of it all, can you tell us a little bit about how you got started playing role playing games and what interested you about it in the first place?
Well, absolutely. Uh, I was 6 years old, I think, and I had gotten my very first copy of a JRPG for the PlayStation 1 from my sister's boyfriend at the time, and it was called Vandal Hearts. And this was like 1996. Yeah. So, 6 years old, I started playing this role playing game. It was a turn based tactical system with a class system and, knights and mages and ninjas and healers and like all this kind of crazy shit and monsters. And I absolutely loved it. And it just was a game that I played consistently. And I remember one of the coolest things about it, me being 6 years old and thinking certain things are amazing, is that when you killed something, like gallons of blood that was inhumane to be inside anything of that body type, size, or physiology, just gallons of blood everywhere through, like literally the effect was very over the top and extra, just terrible.
Like
And I
Mortal
was just
Kombat
like,
for kids.
oh, worse. Literally more blood than a Mortal Kombat fatality. And I was just like, that's so awesome. It just kept playing through the game because I just thought it was cool as shit. Um, and then from there, I kind of was like, this game's amazing. I want to find other games like this. And slowly but surely, I'd stumble across other role-playing games, like Final Fantasy for one. Not one of my favorites, but a lot of people love it, and it is good. So I got into those, and I got into like the Legend of Mana and other types of series, um, and that spanned from all the console games through the late 90s to like early 2000s. And I'd hunt down like the more obscure the better. And even at like we'll fast forward to like 10, 11, 12 years old. I'm sitting there on dial-up AOL internet, you know, downloading emulators and ROMs and downloading patching programs to translate Japanese games to English because I find fans translations on the internet at literally 11, 12 years old. I was like deep dive Googling like a madman finding shit. And that's how I got a hold of like the Fire Emblem games 1 through like 6, I think. They were like Japanese only forever. Um, and that kind of stuff would continue throughout my youth. And it was basically the more I could find these exciting worlds and these amazing people in these worlds and put myself into their shoes, um, the more I was able to escape a life that I was not happy or comfortable in. It was a way for me to forget, even at that young of an age, it was a way for me to forget the terrible things that were going on and to live this life of this amazing person who could do amazing things, and all these other crazy cool characters. And the more abstract and weird, the better to me. So I found all these underdog characters in these Japanese role playing games and fell in love with them because, like, they were the weirdos of the RPGs, and like I
Mm.
identified as a weirdo because I was the weirdo. I was not a very well liked child. Not anything of my own accord. I was just the weird one. I was the nerdy kid,
Mm.
and I was cool with that. But I got a lot of shit even from a very young age all the way through high school. I got a lot of abuse from a lot of different people in a lot of different facets of my life. And I didn't really have like a safe place other than these games. And so all I cared about was playing video games when I was young. Pokemon was a really good one because that was on a Game Boy. I could take that with me anywhere. I could
Right.
take that to school and like find solace even in the most hostile environment of my life. And like that shit, I remember uh I was so good at Pokemon as a kid that my friend accidentally deleted his game file and like was mortified. And I took his cartridge home with me and started playing it from like the bus ride home and like that night. And I beat that game and I got him his favorite Pokemon to the level that he had it at overnight. And like,
Damn.
yeah, I was hardcore at like video games as a kid. Like I go back and play these games now and I'm like, I don't know how I fucking did it. But like my mom even to this day could tell you like, yeah, Jordan, my childhood friend, one of them like deleted his save file and was so sad. And I took the game and did it. She watched me do it all night because I just sat there in the living room on the Game Boy, uh, and just pile drove through it. And I do that with a lot of games when young because I was just so driven on immersing myself in these games and in these worlds and putting myself into all these different shoes. Not even just the main character. I'd usually hate the main character of a video game. It didn't matter which one. I also just did not like the silent protagonist type, even though it was the most bearable.
Yeah.
Um, because if it wasn't a silent protagonist, their attitudes were usually grating as all hell. Um,
When you identify as the other, it's usually really hard to identify with the main character of anything because
oh,
main
absolutely.
characters are typically,
Mm,
especially when we were kids, main characters were designed to be the self-insert. And when
hmm
you design a self-insert, you have to design that to be something that is palatable and relatable to the widest audience, right? So
absolutely.
when you're trying to cast a net and catch as many people as possible, like when an outsider or someone who instinctually identifies as other from, the main group, is going to be difficult for you to like latch on and kind of see yourself as that main character.
Mm. And that was definitely the case. Like, I did not identify with male characters at all. And that was a huge majority of games was like
Mm-hmm.
just some dude starting an adventure, being some badass, and like I didn't I couldn't identify with it. I would always identify more with female characters when I was younger. And I'd always choose if there was a female option, I would most likely choose that and roll with that through the game. Um, it's just because women seemed a lot more relatable. Women were more understandable than a lot of the shit that I saw male characters do. Like I saw so many role playing characters of like men lashing out and doing crazy, obnoxious, like emotional shit. And it's like out of anger. And it's just like, what the hell? Like, no, get it together. And seeing like the women being the ones that are like, calm the hell down, like what the hell, stay like, don't go out there, don't be an idiot, and other situations like that, and through various games. And it's just like, yes, thank you for being the voice of reason, thank you. Like, why aren't you the main character? Why can't we have you in charge of all these people? Half of these characters have died because of this motherfucker at this point in this game. um and so I'd always enjoy usually female characters immensely more. And I got older and older and older and played through games, and this pattern continued, and I find more games and a little bit more representation over time, which is cool, but still not enough, and still trash male characters throughout different games.
Right.
Not to hate on male characters, because there have been plenty of games with good male leads that weren't silent protagonists. um, I mean, one I can think of for an example, just so I'm not saying it, is Lost Odyssey from the Xbox console years.
Okay.
Lost Odyssey had an amazing male lead. Um, there were all the other characters in the game were also equally amazing, and it's just a fucking phenomenal game. Uh,
I've never even heard of it.
it it was pretty well received. It was just obnoxious because for an Xbox game there was 4 discs
Oh shit.
on an Xbox, yeah. Uh,
I
or
mean, I
Xbox
remember
360
multi-disc games
maybe. I
on
don't
like
remember.
the Dreamcast, but
Yeah, it was 4 too. It was a huge game, but it kind of reminded me a lot of like Legend of Dragoon with the fighting system, because it'd be turn-based, and like when you did an attack, there'd be like these rings that would move in like on the screen. You'd have to overlap them and like hit the button at the right moment, and I couldn't do it because I didn't have depth perception to save my life. But I
Mhm.
tried and I played the game. But And then there's this other games too that can come to mind, but overall, I always found the more popular ones that other dudes liked, um, and around then, like, the only people who were vocal about liking video games and nerdy shit were guys back in the
Right.
90s, you know? And even then, being a nerd and liking that kind of shit out in public in real life was unheard of. So I didn't get to find other people like me that enjoyed role playing games in my area or in my tiny ass town, not even. Um, until I was a little older when the internet was available to me, and then I'd start finding people online who like the same games, but even then, those people would, like, be like, "Oh, yeah, this dude was cool," and I'd be like, "Cloud was stupid from Final Fantasy VII," you know what I mean? So, there's just this moment of, confusion even amongst the people that were like-minded, where I would be unable to relate to people I felt most relatable to.
Right.
And it still was a little later in years before I met like female gamers, and they would be more relatable to me. You know, they'd be the ones that I would appreciate more because it's like, oh, thank God, like someone who probably gets it. And even then, there was this just, this whole negative imagery around gamer girls and how men treated gamers in society and on the internet, that even then it was just like there'd be this unable to relate, because at this point in my life, I did not know or like understand what being gay or queer or trans was. So I thought I was just another white straight nerd dude. So like I wasn't into girls. Like I was a kid. I didn't think about like
Right.
sex. I didn't care about that stuff because I knew things wouldn't matter until I'm an adult. So I wouldn't like pursue sexual or major romantic interests, but I would still think that, like, yeah, I should like girls, and I had this kinship and enjoyment out of hanging out and talking to other women, you know? So I was like, yeah, this makes sense. I feel good talking with girls and stuff, blah blah blah. Yeah, you're really cool. And like there'd still be a discomfort because like this supposedly straight guy is like coming on really friendly, but like
Yeah.
so there'd always still be that disconnect. And so it wasn't until I became an adult and I identified myself as like, oh, I'm gay. And later on, identifying more as under a non binary trans spectrum, um, by identifying as bigender. Um, then it started to make more sense. And then I started being able to communicate more effectively and to relate to people a lot more once I finally understood who I was. So now getting into like we're talking JRPGs and like console gaming right now, because I didn't get into D&D until and other tabletop role playing games until I was 25, 26. Mostly because throughout my youth the satanic panic was still like
Right.
in the air.
Yeah.
It, like, was more of a big thing in, like, the late '80s, I think it was, or the early '80s to late '80s, but, like, it was still a thing
Yeah, it
throughout the
was
'90s, and
pretty active
so
in the 80s, yeah.
yeah, so I
But
wasn't,
it
um
infected the mindset of our
Mhm.
parents,
Oh yeah, my
you know?
parents would not let me look at Dungeons and Dragons. Like, never mind all the other video games I played that they'd buy me, but like Dungeons and Dragons was Satan, apparently.
Yeah.
So it was very like weird to me, but I just was like, okay, whatever. Like, and I never thought twice about it, but it was always something that like I thought would be cool. And I did a lot of role playing on the internet through like dice systems and like systems of like style of postings and what you type out and all that, where you play a character, you do actions, you're in like an adventure with people. Like I did very bare bones like homebrew homemade dice systems with people online for a while. but nothing of an official system that I could ever like
Right.
relate to. So I didn't know like that these things were able to be looked up. And then one day, like it just became something in the back of my mind. And then through college and after college, I knew people in college that played D&D, but like I didn't have time. I was in fucking college, and then I was also in college and working. And like I wanted to do it and I wanted to learn, but I never could express interest and like approach for the dedication, because I had understood that like this is a thing people do on the regular. You have to be able to do it. And
Yeah.
so I was unable to schedule time in that point in my life, so I didn't talk about it. But then fast forward to I move in to an apartment below my friend's place, and like we had like this open door policy where we just walk into each other's places all the time if we're home. Like, oh hey, what's up? Yeah, cool. And one night no one was around, and I was just like, well, let's see what they're doing upstairs. I like go upstairs, and everyone's there around a table, and I see figurines on a little board, and I see pencils and paper, and I see books, and everyone's staring at me like, oh God, like as if I just caught them like masturbating or something, right? There was just this like moment of like visible silence and hesitation and tension as we stared at each other. And I'm in this doorway and I'm like, are you guys playing Dungeons and Dragons right now? And just that like shifty eyed look between each other, and they're like, yeah. And I'm like, why can I play? Can you teach me? Like, can I please learn? And they're like, what? You want to learn how to play Dungeons? Like, because I was I was very like feminine and still am very feminine, and I was very like popular amongst the more nerdier girl types.
Right.
So there was this disconnect with the dudes and I.
Hmm.
And that was just because I wasn't comfortable like around guys a lot still. I had a lot of like, I had a lot of things I was working out. Like, and I didn't want people to be uncomfortable because I was like the gay dude. And I didn't want to like give mixed signals or make anyone uncomfortable because I was insecure. So, and nowadays I understand like whatever, if they're not into me, that's fine. But like I'm not gonna feel
Yeah.
bad about being gay anymore. But at that point in time, I had that insecurity
Well, I got
around.
to imagine that, like, because you've mentioned like is sort of like a later realization and a process, right? Of kind of like
Mm,
discovering how you identify and all that. Those are things that like, you know, a lot of us kind of like go through as like a young teenager, right?
mm,
And if you're not discovering that stuff until like later in life, I can imagine how like, yeah, in your mid 20s you might still be a little like hesitant to be so
mm,
like, I don't want to say like forward, but just like kind of cavalier with the idea of like, yeah, if you don't like me, fuck you kind of thing, right?
mm,
Like we all go through that period of like, I want to be accepted by my peers, right?
mm,
So I think we all at some point in our life go through a phase of like hiding little bits of ourselves because we aren't comfortable with the idea of
mm.
um
And that was definitely me in college,
yeah.
100%, because that was the first time I was able to comfortably socialize with people. Like I said, elementary and middle and high school. Well, middle school didn't exist in my day. That's how old I am. But elementary and high school to me was a nightmare for socializing and for getting that, like knowing how to talk to people and how to be a friend and what like real like what real people do. I had like one or two really close friends, and that was it because I was like tortured a lot. Like, and I will literally say the term tortured because it was like mental torture day in and day out, the shit that
Mm.
I had to deal with from multiple people throughout the entire school. It got so bad at one point that I, at 14 years old, had a full blown plan to kill myself, and I was going to do it as soon as I got home. that day. And I told a friend because I didn't want them to worry and wonder where I was because I was going to be dead. And they thankfully told people. Um, so that didn't happen. But like we had everything get shut down for a day and people had to be spoken to and suspensions were made and all that. But like it it was very dramatic. I didn't want to deal with it. I just didn't want to live anymore because of the shit I was going through.
Yeah.
I was like ready to die. I was like there is nothing I would rather have than to not deal with coming back to this hellscape the next day, you know? And that's crazy for someone at 14 to have decided. That's bad. Like that shouldn't happen to people.
It shouldn't.
Um, so there was a lot of disconnect with people and mistrust with people and lack of opening up and being like who I am around people up until college and even through college because like there was things that happened throughout college too because people got the idea that I was very gullible and
Mm.
I was very open to being friends with people and doing things for people because I thought, you know, being nice is important. And I let a lot of people take advantage of me unknowingly for a while. And that ended up hurting me more. But we won't talk about how I'm damaged. But this led the way to me not knowing really how to associate with people and how to
Right.
deal with people due to like fear of people and fear of other people doing things to spite me or to hurt me or to take advantage of me. So like that was that key moment in D&D when those guys were like, "Wait, you want to learn?" And I was like, "Yeah, can I play?" And then like they took me in and helped me learn this stuff and like at first I took like we'll say quote unquote the DM's girlfriend role. I wasn't anyone's girlfriend or boyfriend or any type of sexually related friend at that point in my life or really ever, but I was like the little like girlfriend, quote unquote, affectionately named by the DM because then like they'd help me, they'd make my character and they'd tell me what to do. Like that's how I
Right.
started. And then like slowly, like I forced people to build me a character for a good couple campaigns. And I don't remember those campaigns because I didn't build the character looking back now
Yeah.
in hindsight, but I was in a good amount that I don't remember because like I just didn't know what the fuck was going on yet. But I was learning, you know?
Yeah.
And next thing you know, like I'm making my own characters like overnight. I'm researching, I'm looking up stuff, I'm getting all these cool ideas and it just became this mold that I could turn into whatever I wanted. And it was the create a character that I had always been looking for because I could make literally any character I wanted and put a backstory in there and make it make sense in a way that I couldn't do as a kid with JRPGs on console, you know? It was a way
So,
for me to actually create these worlds in a sense and like really put myself into someone else's
mhm.
shoes that I wanted to be temporarily.
So for a lot of us, our first characters are like self-insert kind of self idealistic versions, right? Like
I've
the
never
who do we want to be?
I've
Was that
never
you've never done that?
as if thinking myself as that person, no. I
Well,
always
maybe
wanted to be
not thinking
somebody
like
different.
yourself. Well, that's the thing, right? Is like it's the kind of like our first characters, like for me, right, isn't necessarily like I'm thinking like, oh yeah, I am this character, right? But it's more of
Mhm.
like, who do I want to be, right? So like my
So
first character is a freaking, barrel chested, hairy chested. He's got a beautiful mustache, which I can't grow a mustache. He's got long, silky black hair. It looks like, in my mind, a cross between um the guy who played Uncle Jesse on Full House and Frank Zappa, like an ugly version of Uncle Jesse, you know?
Mhm.
Because I'm not so, I don't want to be like an Adonis, but like, like a good looking kind of Mediterranean guy, like who's just really strong, got a sword and a shield, is really confident and like, not necessarily charismatic, but just like confident and heroic, right? I am
Um,
none of those things in real life. I am
so
none of those things, but I would like to be those things.
I get that, and I still don't think necessarily the same way that you're getting around to it. It's like I know the way that I explained it kind of sounds like, oh yeah, I want to temporarily be that person, but it's more so I just want to play that character and to tell a story about like this character I came up with more so than I want to be this person,
Interesting.
cuz I'm aware, that these characters can die. I'm aware that these characters can go in a completely different direction.
Mhm.
And I as a person, I've never played like a self-insert in a campaign. A lot of things can be
Interesting.
similar to like some of my personality facets, like the way I can enunciate things, the way I can express myself, and the way that I would do certain situations are from myself because I'm unable to completely think like a different person.
Right.
But when I play a character, it's more so I just thought of a really cool idea and I wanted to do it. And it didn't mean it was a good idea and it didn't mean it was a bad idea, but it was just like, oh, it would be cool if like I had this druid with its animal companion that worked as like a dual flanking like combo duo build, like a hunter, so basically turning a druid more into a ranger. And people would be like, well, why don't you just play a ranger? I don't want to play a ranger. I want to play a druid that's really good at fucking fighting with his animal companion because the animal companion's stronger as a druid. And people would be like, oh, just wild shape. I'm like, that's stupid. Why would I want to shapeshift when I'm like already doing what I want to do? Like, and so I wouldn't do these optimized like max tier options. And it made a
Right.
lot of the gamers that I started with frustrated because they're like, well, why wouldn't you just do this instead? And it just to
Because
me,
they're
it's like,
completely missing the point of a
right.
role-playing game.
Right. I just wanted to create this asinine idea of a character that would most likely star as a recruitable character in any old standard like stereotypical JRPG game, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There'd always be that slight JRPG influence. And even when I went on to start DMing, I would tell people like I have a heavy JRPG influence in my style of DMing. I'm not going to be a weeaboo about it, but I'm also like it's gonna be like superpower easy mode in a sense, but there's still gonna be some heavy shit thrown at you. Be prepared for like you're gonna notice. And like people come back and be like, yeah, you're right. Like it seems like it's easy mode because of how much you give us, but at the same time, I'm throwing a heavy amount of difficulty that seems asinine at people. Um,
I seem to do that too, but it has nothing to do with JRPGs.
I just like the idea of because I'm aware as a DM, as a player, I don't care if I die. I like my
Same here.
character, but I
I
don't care if I die
actively
because it's
try
in
and
the
kill my
rules.
characters.
Right, it's a thing. It can happen. That's the point. You make another character and do
Yeah.
another story. Even
Yeah,
slap
what's
the
the point
second
in
on there and be their illegitimate child. Like it's even funnier.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, for me, it's always been hard. I think I've mentioned in other episodes, but like when I started, I started as a DM, and I started at a time before there was all these podcasts and actual play shows and stuff.
mhm,
So, I was doing a lot of reading, and for me, learning about how Gygax did it, he was very like games were super deadly in
mhm,
original, OD&D and A Advanced Dungeons and Dragons and
mhm.
stuff. So like for me there was always been this like sort of like, okay, like this is a game, like you get
Right.
into it, you get to play a role, but it's not like, I was never a method actor when I was like in plays and stuff. Like it was always like trying to learn like, okay, who this character is and all that stuff, but I wasn't living as
Mm,
that character. I was
right.
acting as a character.
Right.
And
It's
it's the
just a
same thing
temporary
with like
hat that you wear for a
D&D.
couple hours once a week, or maybe
Yeah.
every other week. But
It's so
this
weird to me when
i-
people get like super invested in their
right.
characters. And like, I don't want
So
my
as a
character to
player,
die.
that's
That's
also my
I'm mocking, and
mindset.
I shouldn't be
I
mocking,
no,
but
I
like
agree with you 100%. I
it is.
laugh when people cry over the characters dying because I'm like, come on, dude, it's a game. And like, yeah, it's a game that you put a lot of investment and thought into and you role
I,
play this character, but
I
if you can't
think
remove yourself from
it's
that at the end of the day, clearly at some point that's going to affect a friendship with someone and that's an issue. That's when the game becomes an issue to me. People
true.
get
I
too
think
into it.
there's I think there's a
Um,
fine line between being overly attached to a character for whatever reason and having their death be a catharsis. Like I
mm,
think the reason for the tears is very important as to whether or not I would like just be dismissive of their emotion.
right.
Like if that particular character really meant something to you because you know it was a sense of a self insert and you had a catharsis, like an actual emotional like release because that character had a story arc that like really you connected with, then okay. But like if you're
Mm,
just like, I don't want my character to die because you've inflated it somehow with like,
mm.
I don't know.
And that's why, as a DM, because I know I sound hypocritical with this stuff, because I'm so on board with your side of like, yeah, characters die, get over it. As a DM, I did this JRPG styled theme because I needed the player to feel empowered because I knew all the people at my table. And no matter what they said, I just knew the general consensus amongst these people was if I died, I'm going to go depressive and be upset and I'm going to take my ball and go home. And sure enough, whether it was my campaign or someone else's campaign, I saw at least everyone once have that moment. And I was like, I'm not going to do this. I don't want to deal with this because I'm the last person you want to do it to because I'm going to like drop the game like at that moment we're going to be like, okay, the D&D time is over. What the fuck is wrong with you? Get out of my house. Like, don't act like a goddamn child. Like, do not disrespect me like that. We are adults. You will act like one. You will be cordial. Like, this is a game. This is nothing personal. And now you're making it personal. So I'm going to rip your throat out. And I've had to
Yeah.
do that once or twice. And I don't like to do that. I don't want to be the person who has to be the adult and be like, no, grow up. Like, so I've made it in a thing when I DM that I make my players overpowered. I give them extra hit die. I max their hit die every level. I give them extra powers. I make multi-classing free. I might even do Gestalt because fuck it, it's cool for you to level up in two classes at once. And I make it so they're so overpowered. And the reason I throw so much overpowered shit at them on top of that is because I know it's going to even out and I know they're still probably going to win. There's still that chance of death because dice happen. But overall, they still have the distinct advantage.
Hmm.
And at the end of the day, their feelings are not going to get hurt, you know?
Interesting.
And
I think like in some respects I'm on the opposite side of that too. Like because for me, I'm just like, nah, man, fucking dice fall as they fall. Like I
mm,
don't there are times like especially now that I'm like doing the stream and stuff where I roll, in air quotes behind the screen for certain things, and it's usually for social encounters
mm,
um or things that like the characters just shouldn't know. And part of the reason I'm doing that is because I have a lot of new players in
mm,
this game, and a lot of those new players have a very difficult time, it seems. And this isn't, for any of you guys out there listening to this that are in my game, this isn't a bad thing. This is just everyone goes through this. It's kind of hard to separate out of character knowledge with in character knowledge when you're first starting the game. And so there are times when there are things like, oh, he rolled a 10 on that die, and I know he must be lying, but like, if that 10, if you happen to have a negative to your insight and that 10 beats your 9 or whatever, passive insight, because your passive insight is 10 minus 1,
Hmm.
like, those kinds of things is where I roll behind the screen. But like when I'm playing with people who are like really, really keen on separating those things out because they've had some practice to it,
Hmm.
um and I roll all my dice in the open. I'm not, and if it's a critical hit, and if I roll max damage on that critical hit, and if that
Hmm.
kills you outright, you're dead. And
Yeah.
if you have a problem with it, like I'm, just like you said, fucking get over it. Like this
Yeah.
is
Like
just a game. Build
I
a new character. I mean,
I've
I had a
tried to I've tried to roll behind screen before, and I always got like venomous attitudes against it.
hmm.
And like I've wanted to do it because I want to give that chance for some people where it's like sometimes I've rolled 20 plus nat ones in one night.
Yep.
I have done that personally myself. I am notorious for nat oneing left and right an entire night consistently throughout the years that only couple of years that I've been playing, 6 years. And people have seen it, and like I don't get angry often, but when I literally start hitting double digits, let alone get to 20 nat ones, I'm like, I wish I was exaggerating when I said this. Like, I am just asinine, like, like by the end of it, and I would just give up. Like, I'm not gonna walk out and leave, but I'm just at that point, I'm not having a good time anymore because Jesus fucking
Right.
Christ. So I don't want that to happen to other people because I've seen it and I've experienced it. So I love to offer like I'm going to roll like behind this cuz I also like you said, oh, they see the 10. Oh, ha ha ha. Like no, you don't know what that modifier is. Like
Yeah.
and plus like I technically shouldn't even do that because that's inherently people are going to inherently see that, myself included, and metagame it and be like, "Oh yeah, I rolled high. Clearly I'm going to hit." Like you don't know that.
Right. Right.
And I'm guilty of that too.
And there's also times I think when rolling behind a screen is good, even if you know what outcome you're going to do for
Mm,
certain things, it's good to give the players a little
mhm.
suspense or something. So
It's
like,
more immersion.
yeah, so like doing stuff on the show, right? There will be times when I legitimately like we're at a point like on the stream where I know we have enough time to do a combat, but I don't know if we necessarily need to do combat in that episode. And so, like, if especially if we're traveling or something, I'll just roll some dice. And like I legitimately want to know, okay, should there be a random encounter here? Like, should just something
Mhm,
randomly happen?
mhm,
Right. And I have like lists and stuff bookmarked and stuff and various websites that should I come up with like a random encounter, I can like quickly figure out what it is. But like there are other times when you're traveling and I know that we don't have enough time for something, or that we definitely have enough time for something and the conclusion is already made up in my mind, but I'm rolling and like trying to get the clack of the dice to like appear on my microphone so that the people playing are kind of like, oh shit, what's about to happen, right? But most of the time I like to roll in the open because it's, like it is a game at the end of the day. And if you're not, if you don't know what's going on at any point, then what's the point of rolling dice?
mhm.
If the DM is always rolling behind the screen, why is he rolling at all?
That's
Like you
fair.
just you just make it just fucking make it up, right? Be
Mm.
like, oh yeah, this one hits you. Okay, that one doesn't. Okay, he misses again. Okay, this time he hits. Oh,
Right.
cool, he got a critical hit this time. Like, like, eh, like if you're,
And I'm that's also just like wanting to give the players the knowledge of knowing that like the DM himself is also being honest, which I understand
yeah,
because but the thing I see that's a problem with that to begin with is like the inherent distrust. All over. Like, oh, I'm gonna hide my roles because I don't trust the players to be able to handle like seeing the real role. And it's also the players going, well, why is he hiding all the roles? Like, is he just
I
gonna
think
fuck us over?
I think a lot of people, um, at least at some point within their playing of these games, I think a lot of people have a adversarial relationship with the dungeon master.
Mm-hmm.
Like they view them as the enemy as a
Yeah.
certain extent because you're playing the enemies,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's something like, yeah, especially with new players, and I'm constantly saying like, listen, I am a neutral observer in what happens to your characters. And oftentimes I'm not neutral, but I am actually rooting for you to win.
Right.
But for things to feel earned and for things to feel like they matter, I need to give some amount of conflict, right? So it's not just like, if everything is, oh yes, you win, then none of it matters, right? So some level of conflict is necessary, but then also like an actual like dire circumstance needs to happen at certain points so that it feels like very I want to say very earned, but I don't think grammatically that makes sense. But you know what I'm saying? Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's a difference between like session that we just had this past weekend where the characters in the show that I run on my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/folsom_art. The thing that we do on Saturday night, our characters are level 8 right now,
Mm.
and there's 5 of them, and I threw them up against like a war band of not hobgoblins, bugbears and goblins and zombies and skeletons. But that is like there was like the bugbear chief is like a CR3
Mm.
creature, and bugbears are like CR1, I think
Yeah.
CR2,
Half
something
or
like that.
one.
Goblins are like a CR quarter, and I think a zombie and a skeleton are like CR 1/8. So there's a
Mm.
lot of enemies, but like our characters are so powerful that like, you know, they cast a fireball, and more than half of the time, even if those creatures make their saving throw, they just die anyway because they don't have enough
Mm-hmm.
hit points to
Mm-hmm.
survive something like that. And that kind of combat was like, I think it was fun to see them get all like, oh my god, there's so many goblinoids,
Mm.
we're never gonna win this fight, and then they just like face roll it, right?
Just stomped
But
them. Yeah.
who knows when I'm going to like throw an adult or ancient dragon at this group that
Mm-hmm.
could totally fuck up their day, and that they're either gonna have to run away or like pull some fancy shit out their ass and
Mm-hmm.
actually like win, because they've done that in this campaign. In season 1 they were like level 5, and I threw them up against not only in just an aboleth, which is a monster twice their power
Wow.
level,
Yeah.
but also there were minions in that fight too. And
Jeez.
they just I don't know, I don't think it was tactics, like planned tactics. I think it was all like opportunity and reacting in the moment, but they
Mm.
just happened to do something where they were surviving the aboleth barely. They started to retreat, which is smart, good tactics. Realized that there was a choke point in the hallway, and so they kind of stopped. They didn't keep retreating, and they started picking off the minions. Um in the choke point in this hallway where they could only go single file.
Mm.
And then once they like had gotten enough of the minions taken care of, they went back into the room where the aboleth was, not knowing that the aboleth had left to cut them off at the exit to these to the layer that they were in.
Mm.
And I literally had rolled a like a d6 or something as a timer, right? So like the okay, it's going to take the aboleth, x number of rounds to get to the entrance. Then the aboleth's going to wait x number of rounds before realizing they're not coming out that way, and he's going to go look for them again. And it just, so it just happened to be like them retreating made the aboleth leave the area, and they were able to go back in and basically finish the encounter. And then by the time they were on their way out, the timer had run out and the aboleth was on his way back to
Mm.
the lair, and they just happened to escape without having to fight the aboleth. So but
Wow.
that was something that I know for a fact that because they still mention it. you know, I know that that was an encounter that definitely felt like they earned their victory, because it was an insane kind of
Yeah.
obstacle that they had to overcome. And like I don't know what my point is, but I do think at a certain point, I guess
Ye
we were talking about the adversarial nature of
Right,
DMing,
yeah.
right?
You
The
wanna give
whole
them that
time though, I was
challenge,
rooting for
but
them, even though like
mm,
I had done this thing. And I honestly had never intended for them to fight the Aboleth in the first place.
mhm.
They had started working with this thieves guild, and I thought that they were going to actually work for the thieves guild. But morals got in the way. Ethics is a thing, I guess. And so they decided to two-time the thieves guild, and I had this whole thing planned with like this statue of an aboleth that was like holding memories and stuff. Like you could put a memory into it. And what made them change their mind was, I put a moral dilemma in front of them again, because you need to have these moments of catharsis and stuff, right? To like make the playing of a character feel important. So what I did was, the noble who had it, his wife had died, and he had stored his memory of the last time that they danced together. And so you played like, a Star Wars hologram of him and his wife dancing. And they were like, well, fuck, we can't steal his memory of him and his wife their last dance together. That would make us assholes. And so they like didn't steal the thing, and they like tried to double cross the thieves guild. But what they didn't know was like, because I don't think it's ever going to come up, but maybe it will. I don't know. Potential spoilers? Who knows? But yeah, that thing doesn't just house that guy's memories, it houses other memories. And
Mhm,
aboleths are memory like absorbers, like generational kind of things, right? So,
mhm,
like one aboleth, when it has a baby or a child or something, or however they spawn. I don't fucking know how it works. But I
mhm,
do know that they pass down their memories to the next generation. In some kind of like ritual or whatever. So
mm,
like one aboleth will have the memories of like all the way back to the beginning of time, because every aboleth passes its memories down from one generation to the next, right? So I was just like, well, yeah, this idol just can store memories, and this aboleth wants this idol because he wants more memories, he wants more knowledge, he wants more power. And like never intended for them to fight this thing at all. I was gonna give it over. I was gonna show this thing getting more memories and stuff. Especially at the time, we had a character who wanted to become a god, and had theorized that becoming a god, the first step of becoming a god is learning how to kill a god. And
mhm,
aboleths want to kill the gods because they were back at the kind of,
mhm,
they've always been clashing forces, because aboleths have been around since the beginning of the universe
mm,
in D&D lore. And they like clash against god. So I was like, not only did I not intend them to fight the aboleth, I was also like, well, hey, guy who wants to become a god and for whatever reason thinks that the way to do that is learning how to kill a god. Here is a creature who wants to kill gods, who is literally their purpose for existing is warring against gods and killing them. Why are you not wanting to align yourself with this thing to learn how to do what you claim is your goal, you know? But that's the fun about D&D, you know, even though I make these choices difficult for them and make their, you know, lives potentially super dangerous. I'm always doing things that, you know, are intended to be beneficial to them,
Mm,
but they don't mean anything if you don't have to work for it.
mm. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I try to do similar. I try to make like these grand scenarios to make things worth it overall. And sometimes they go completely opposite the direction you want it to go, but it still works out to be a pretty effective moment. So that always works in my favor, I feel. I've had like one or two scenarios where it just went south real quick, but anytime that that's happened, like the worst possible scenario, it's usually just been player input genuinely. And I don't
Mhm.
mean to like be mean to a player when I say that, but it's just sometimes it's a singular player just did something stupid and it just the one quote I say, and I warn all my players, is if I ever ask you, are you sure you want to do that? You better reconsider what you're about to do. Because, like, I am not going to give you any more meta knowledge than that. Just, are you sure you want to do this? And that's it. And that's like, you want to call my bluff, do it. But, like, you're not going to like it. And I've had people do that. And it's like, okay, all
Mhm.
right. I can't feasibly, like, make any excuse after a certain point. So it's just like,
I
damn.
would say 90% of character deaths at my table have been because of player action and not just random dice rolls or because of things that I have put in there to specifically try and like kill off characters, you know.
Mm,
I can only speak for myself in this, but I do think that maybe this is a common thing amongst certain DMs, especially old school DMs, not older DMs, but like those of us who maybe had to start out DMing and only had articles to go off of from the 70s, you know, is like there is sort of that. At least I had to grow out of the mindset of like, oh yeah, this is going to be the fight that kills them all, you know. Now it's you know, I put in deadly encounters because I'm fairly confident that they will succeed, but I want it to be like an earned victory instead of just a thing that I hand them, like, you know, throwing a group of goblins at a level 8 party. um but uh but yeah, you know, it's wild to see some of the choices people make, and I think it is unanimous throughout the culture of role-playing games. When the game master, the narrator, the dungeon master, whatever you want to call them, if they ask you if you're sure of an action, you better damn well be sure that you want to do that and are willing to accept whatever consequences, you know, come out of it. And I would also caution DMs to not abuse that phrase. Don't be like they're like, huh, I'm gonna go buy a healing potion. Like, are you sure you want to like make sure that that phrase like continues to have weight in your game? You know, you don't want to what is it? You don't want to cry wolf too much with that phrase. Otherwise, players will stop taking it seriously. And then when they're actually going to be, you know, they're like, yeah, I'm gonna cut this rope and swing as the chandelier goes down. I'm going to swing on the chandelier and I'm going to like fly over the lava flow that's in this like, broken down ruin. And halfway across, I'm going to let go of the rope and try and stab this, like magma creature in the face and land safely on their other side. And when you say, are you sure you want to do that? And like, you've dicked around too much with that phrase that they're just going to like do it anyway. And then when you say, well, sorry, you misjudged the distance on this map and like the squares were actually 10 feet. And I'm sorry, you forgot that for this encounter and you die because you no way you could cross that chasm. Like that's on you at that point as a DM, right? But if you keep that phrase intact, then whatever happens is on the player, like you can only give them so many hints, you know you can only give them so many hints. But yeah, I think now is a perfect time to head into the break. If you guys have listened to all of the podcasts that are out there so far of Thought Balloons, I'm sure you've heard them before, but gonna play a couple of ads here, and when we come back, we will continue talking with Dion Westford about RPGs and what is so interesting about them. Enjoy the break, everybody. Do you want to class up your gaming? Are you sick of card tables and cheap plastic sleeves for your character sheets? Do you like real wood and are convinced magnets are the only magic we have left in our current age of science? Then head over to legendcraft.ca to spruce up your tabletop gaming setup. They offer felt top gaming tables with add-ons like cup holders, tablet holders, dice trays, roll boxes, and more. Newly released in January 2021 is their Magna Tracker system. With versions for both health and spell tracking, these sleek and stylish tracking boards come with magnetized tracking pips that allow you to slide them back and forth along clean-cut channels, making tracking your health and spell slots easy to use and read, all without the constant erasing and writing on your character sheet. And did I mention that both the Magna Trackers and the tables are customizable and personalizable? That's right. Your table and or Magna Tracker will be one of a kind when you order at Legendcraft. Legendcraft is partnering with me to offer you a 5% discount on your orders at legendcraft.ca. That's right, you can get a 5% discount when you enter the code F_ART at checkout. That's F_art. Go to legendcraft.ca. That's legendcraft.ca with discount code F_art for 5% off. Legendcraft.ca. Order today. If you like this podcast and would like to support the show, head over to patreon.com/Folsham_art. As little as $1 per month, you not only support Thought Balloons and get to submit questions to be answered by myself and the guest host, but you will also have access to my webcomic 3 to 4 weeks before they're released to the public and my weekly update blog. At higher tiers, you'll gain access to full issues and short story comics, and you can even see progress and add input to projects I'm working on. That's patreon.com/FOULSHAM_ART to support Thought Balloons today. Welcome back from the break, everybody. We are here for part 2 of the podcast with Dion Westford. Dion, welcome back from the break.
Thanks. I'm so glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you here. So during the first part of the podcast, we talked about your beginnings of D&D, and then we kind of got off on a tangent about our kind of DM philosophies and stuff like that. But you mentioned in the beginning of like finding yourself and coming to know who you are, and I think, in especially in like the last year, with stuff coming out of Wizards of the Coast, and well, even more than that, in fifth edition in general, there has been a big push to be to for representation in all areas, not just the LGBT spectrum, but like
Mm,
they were talking about just recently about how they're going to change how racial benefits are working because they don't want to like put too much focus on there being differences within the races,
mm.
trying to come to a more progressive and modern look at this kind of stuff. And I think it would be interesting to get I it's hard for me to talk on this stuff because I am a mostly straight identifying white male. Like, I
Mm.
do not have the authority to talk on a lot of this stuff, so I'd be interested in getting your ideas on Wizards of the Coast in general doing this stuff, but like the culture of RPGs and whatnot kind of swinging towards being very representative of minority groups in general, whether it's LGBT racial groups or whatever.
Mm.
um do you think it's going in the right direction? Do you think it's not gone far enough? Do you think it's going too far? Like
I think what they've done recently with the racial adjustments, is just something that DMs have been doing for years.
Mhm.
Not all of them, because some people are sticklers to the books for whatever reason. But a lot of DMs are really open to just being like, in my experience, the ones that I've been with are like, yeah, you just want to like look like an orc, but you want to like do this, sure, or all that. As long as mechanically they're following like the right processes in certain ways, then like
Yeah.
it's an easy thing to tweak and to work into getting that representation that you need, whether it's fictional or legitimate. Um, I I think it's cool that they finally put it in a book because it gives those DMs that are like, well, it's not, there's no rule. Now there is.
Right.
So it's paving the way to allow less of the BS when it comes to certain DMs just being like wishy-washy about things. And I think it's going in a good direction. Do I think it should be as big as the deal as it is? No, because it should just make sense that like
Right.
not all orcs are going to be inherently strong and constitution based, you know? There are smart orcs out there. So why couldn't you have an orc that, goes by an elf's stats, like just do the
Mhm.
elf racial stats and yeah, it's an orc, whatever. Instead of elven blood, it's an orc blood type, It's for orc slaying weapons will still affect him just as negatively. Like he's just smart. Like so he can be a wizard. That kind of stuff like is feasible and makes sense. So the fact that it's been like a thing that came up as an issue is weird to me, but it is because the representation is needed, so I get it.
Right.
It's just like I just always thought that way and been
Mhm.
open to doing that stuff. So it's strange to see that people had an issue with it.
See, I've been on the fence. I've never been anti-representation or whatever, right? And if
Mm,
you've ever like if people have ever wanted to play like a smart or cool, fine. But for me, it's always been like the racial stats, in my opinion, have never been like all orcs are strong
mm,
and constitutional. It's just that the average orc, like the orcs as a species, are strong and have a
mm,
high constitution. So whether or not you are the smartest orc out there compared to a halfling, you are strong and you have a high constitution,
mm,
right? And where being a smart orc or a not smart orc for me came into play, I will preface this by saying I don't really care if you want to have a plus. If for the player, if having that +2 in intelligence really means something to you, cool, go for it. But to me, it's just like, well, if you're rolling for stats, especially if you're rolling for stats,
Mhm.
and you happen to get an 18 on the die, and you want to play a smart orc, just put that 18 in intelligence. Like, it doesn't,
Mhm.
just because you have a +1 in strength and a +2 in constitution, or vice versa, whatever it is for a half orc,
Right.
doesn't necessarily mean that you have to put your stats that
And
way,
I
you
think a
know?
lot of people don't think that way. I get it, so that's why I'm like, yeah, it makes sense to me. Why not? A lot of people don't think that. A lot of people won't see that right away. They'll just be like, well, I can't just use this feature and blah blah blah. Maybe sometimes it's because as someone who likes to min max, like
Hmm.
I can look at that and be like, well, I'm not getting the +2 into it. Like blah blah blah. I want to just switch all the elven features so it's an easy swap out, you know. And so, but yeah, I'm stumbling over my words at this point. But I think just a lot of people don't realize it's not
Hmm.
as difficult to do that as it is. They just want to see an option available, so it's easier to just that one. You
No,
know,
I
it's like
know.
looking at a Denny's menu and it's all pictures. I want that one because it's visible and I see it, so
Right.
I know I can do it.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, part of, being an artist is I've always been an abstract thinker. So I guess part of it is
Hmm.
just sort of like how I am and how I view things. Now I know like you played a lot of like 3.5, and just in our talks, in general, I know that you like are way more knowledgeable about the system and the lore of D&D more than I am. Like I said, when I started as a DM, I've always come from a position of wanting to be a writer and a creator. And so,
Hmm.
and I also was sort of under the assumption, again, because I was reading shit about how Gygax did it. Gygax had to create his own shit because there was no shit before him, right?
Hmm.
But I took that as, oh, it's just, yeah, DMs make up their own worlds, right? It
Hmm.
never even occurred to me in the beginning to ever run like a game within, Greyhawk or within the Forgotten Realms or anything like that, because I was just like, oh, I mean, those worlds, like, they exist, and they're like, the foundations that you can like look at for inspiration or something. But like, I never was like, wait, people are actually running games in these things. And
Right.
also for me, it's easier just to remember like the lore of the worlds and stuff if I'm the one who's creating it. But from someone who I feel like has more insight into that, like, actual like official capacity lore than I do you know if the races are completely separate? Like, can in D&D lore, like, I know it is in Ozrin because I've written it to be this way, that a halfling could have a kid with an orc, right? And make it like an orcling or whatever you want to call
Hmm.
it.
Hmm.
But like, is that something that they can, is that something in like actual like D&D settings that is like possible? Or is
Yes.
there an actual separation of the races that would necessitate the racial kind of rules that we have come to accept or know within the system?
So the thing with like 3.5 is there's so much variation with all the material that's been put out over the years that it was running, that you can pick like any type of gnome subtype and be almost equal to like an elf of a subtype that you're looking to go for. You're just a gnome instead and have slightly different features because like you're tiny. There's also like lore wise, yes, there's mechanics for like half orc, half halfling, or half minotaur, half, elf. And
Okay.
there's definitely things for that. And likewise, there's prestige classes where it's like you can't be this class unless you are this race. Which
Hmm.
my groups have always just been like, whatever, you can take whatever class you want, no racial restrictions because they're stupid.
Yeah.
And that's just how we always ran. Uh and the whole like I never have actually ran official like adventures through any D&D universe. I've also been of the mind of like, well, if I make the universe, I know what I can and can't do. I don't have to
Hmm.
waste time looking up like the lore and the history and doing like a whole lesson. So I'm actually also kind of ignorant to a lot of the lore and history of D&D. I
Okay.
also just thought it was way too conglomerated over the years for me to even care about because there's so much of it. I'd rather just
Right.
look at the mechanics and apply it to my own world.
Exactly. Exactly.
And that's even with 5th edition. Like we've done like stuff that has drawn influence and taken certain figures from D&D,
Hmm.
but it's usually just done in a homebrewed world that people have
Yeah.
made, or like a basic thing that like they took like a map and then did whatever. um, but like Strahd has appeared in campaigns that I've played in, even though it wasn't like official D&D universe stuff. You know, we still were like, yeah,
Hmm.
Strahd, and like the Lady of Pain from Sigil, and like other gods and goddesses. We still drew upon those in that pantheon. Um, but usually it was a lot of people did their own worlds because it was just easier that way. I've played in like Curse of the Underdark and stuff, and I really enjoyed it. It's just I found myself again lore wise at a loss. Whereas with like a homebrewed world, especially if I had been playing with those people for a while, like it was easy to pick up on the stuff, and they also could explain it very concisely and briefly if I needed an explanation rather than looking up 5 different books
Yeah.
and like
I mean,
looking
that
up
right
nerd
there is why
commentary.
I've never gotten into third
Mm,
3.5 is like because there's so much you can do in 3.5. I
mm,
mean, I feel like I could figure out the mechanics of the system, right? Like that's, it's a super crunchy system compared to fifth. That's not what like deters me from doing 3.5. Literally what deters me from 3.5 is there is such a volume
mm-hmm,
in that game where like I know that if I wanted to play a guy who's really good at fighting with a sword in one of his hands, and then he could shoot like laser beams out of his other hand and like be like really nimble and dexterous and like, kind of like my like imagination of what I would really want out of a sword mage. I know that it's possible to do it, but
mm,
how many like which specific subclasses, what feats, what paragon class, like I don't know
mm.
any of this, and it's so dense
Yeah,
that I just nope.
yeah, I get that. Your best bet is usually to find somebody who's a good resource on it to begin with.
Yeah.
And then to go from there. That's what I used to have to do, and then I started finding like the more things that I'd ask, the more things that those people could no longer supply the answer for because I
Hmm.
had surpassed their knowledge of the various things. So then I had to go and like talk to other people who knew about different source books, or I had to just go and look it up myself. And then I found through the magical power of the internet a little treasure of PDFs that are available to look at, and it just made finding everything I needed way easier, and it made learning about it like super exciting because I just find myself scrolling and finding ideas, and then like just like doing the little hunting and research was exciting to me because it made me remember like doing reports in like school or whatever, and, like trying to
Hmm.
find all this information to produce something at the end, and like next thing you know you have this like crazy character that you did all this work looking for, and then like it's even if they die, it's still like I did this. I made this thing a reality. Like I created this and made sure that it came to fruition. So
I
it made
gotta
creating
say,
things more fun because I find 5e is very plug and play, and like I wanna think otherwise, but it's every time I do 5th edition, it's just I draw from one of 7 books,
Mm-hmm.
copy paste, boom, there's your character. The there's no flexibility and uniqueness after a certain point, even with feats and giving people bonus feats in 5th edition. Like you can only do so many builds.
I can
So,
see that. Yeah, they're definitely like the more books that come out, the more flexibility is being put into
mm,
the system.
mhm. I definitely think
But
Tasha's Cauldron coming out recently has been a really nice touch because I looked at it and there's so much to it and it's so good how much they've like added in just one book.
yeah, and I haven't even begun to dig into Tasha's like at
Oh, it's
all.
so good.
I know that there's like mechanics and stuff about traps in it that I'm interested in like looking up because I feel like traps are something that was very underrepresented
Hmm.
represented fucking whatever that word is. I'm having trouble with that word today.
Underrepresented.
That's the word, represented.
Mhm.
Like I kept wanting to add another syllable in there. Anyway, traps were something underrepresented in the DMG and in just in general, like up until now. So that's something I want to look at. But yeah, I don't know. I just for whatever reason haven't done it yet. And that book's been out for what, 4 months now?
Mhm.
Like I'm definitely sleeping on that book, and I probably shouldn't be. Um, but yeah, it's funny to me that you say like, I mean, first of all, one of the nerdiest things I've ever heard in reference to D&D, which is already a very nerdy subject, is that you said you enjoy the looking into the books because it reminds you of doing reports in school, which I find endearing. But it's
Just
the
like
exact thing that I personally hate about doing it because fuck doing reports. God damn it. Like I
I
don't
just
want to
liked
do a
being able to.
homework. This is a hobby. I want to have
I know,
fun.
right? I know. I really enjoyed being able to hunt down information and like if I get an idea and I had like the solid backing to put behind it, I could do it,
Right.
instead of having to like force someone to homebrew something.
I just
Um,
think it's an amazing example of how role playing games in general it can it appeals to like people of like all walks, right? Like
mhm.
the one thing that you really like about doing a certain thing is like something that I absolutely despise, but we both equally enjoy the game, because there's just so much to it. There's so many different ways to approach it that it is approachable by everyone, which I think is
Mhm.
really cool. um but yeah, like I don't know. I just think it's really interesting, and I will say like I definitely support more of the like representation and stuff that was Watsy's doing, Wizards of the Coast. Um and yeah, I mean, while like I have my opinions on the whole like I just always thought that the fucking races represented the average adventurer from that group. Um I'm like really excited. Have what okay, so are the new racial stuff, is that coming out or is that in Tasha's? Cuz like I'm
Um,
super interested in like getting like into that material and seeing how like the system works.
it might be in Tasha's. I can look super quick. Um,
I just
reason
didn't
why I
know if
think it's
you
Tasha's
knew.
is because they've added so many different class features that really made it so
Mhm.
like the first example I can think of that comes to mind is they added a unarmed fighting style
Oh.
for anyone that gets the fighting style feat or feat class feature. So like unarmed fighting is now no
Interesting.
longer just beneficial if you're a monk. You know, anyone else can fight with a fist, which to me makes sense because, like, yes, you can learn the kung fu and do the key point stuff as a monk and fight with your fists, but like, why can't like an orc or Goliath barbarian punch you in the face and do a D8 of damage? You know, why is that only going to be like a D1, a D3, a D4? You know, that does not make sense to me. So the fact that Tasha's finally added that as a fighting style to make it so that like I can punch you in the face and do just as much damage as anyone else just because I have enough strength. Um,
Hmm.
that makes
So
sense
that
to
brings up an interesting question from my perspective as a DM, and especially one who likes to homebrew a lot of stuff. One of the main tenets or guidelines of homebrewing things is to be careful about detracting from a class, right? You don't want to homebrew something that is going to make another class kind of feel like it's insignificant.
me. Mm.
Um so where do you fall on the line of like should so like we have like with monks, right? They have their key points and all that kind of stuff that makes them unique still, even if other people are really good at hand-to-hand combat.
Mm.
But like where do you fall on that line of just like, yeah, it doesn't matter, like who cares if you're a fighter or whatever, like everyone should be able to wear like heavy armor and be really good with weapons, or like, who cares if you're a monk or not? Everyone should be able to do karate.
Well,
Like,
when you think about it, you can do like a monk that can learn how to wear heavy armor. You have to take the feats, but you can do it. It's possible if you get that many feats to do such a thing. So it is in the books and it is possible to do. Now, if somebody were to come to me and be like, I want to be a monk, but I want to be able to wear heavy armor, I would tell them, okay, when you get the feat progression to do that, you can do that. And they'll be like, their response will be, well, that's like 3 or 4 feats. That's almost impossible to do at a low level. And I'll tell them, well, then it looks like if you want to wear heavy armor, you start as a fighter and multi-class into monk, even if it's a 1 to 2 level dip, which you would want to do the 2 level dip because then you get action surge. Like, an
yeah.
action surge as a monk is disgusting. So why not? Uh, you know, like it's available, do it. Like you might have to find a workaround for certain things, but I don't think because like a monk is not going to train in heavy armor from the get-go. That would not make sense for somebody who's trying to study martial arts, which is specifically unarmed or armored combat for that class that is laid out. It would not make sense for them to also be training and wearing heavy armor at the same time, unless you
Right.
did the feat progressions and had those levels to get those feats or whatever. Um, and likewise, like if a mage wanted to uh, be really good at fighting, well, you gotta train as a fighter to be able to fight. So, like, yeah, take a couple levels in fighter. And you get to level 3, it stacks with Eldritch Knight really well. Do it. Like, if you're an
Hmm.
elf, go Blade Singer, because why wouldn't you not go Blade Singer if you wanted to be a fighter and be magical? Like, there's so many different options, and like I said before, I even sometimes just go, I don't care if you're an elf or not. You want to be a blade singer, do it. Like, yes, like take it, have fun.
Well,
Um,
that was something else that I wanted to like mention when we were talking about you know, races and different things that are like, locked behind that racial progression. While I as a DM would never say, yeah, no, you can't do this, because, it's locked behind racial stuff in the rules. Um, I kind of appreciate those racial boundaries because I would never have played an elf character if I didn't want to play a blade singer, and I know
Mhm.
that I would be playing under DMs who have the same like, oh yeah, if you don't want to be an elf, you don't have to be an elf. But like I took it upon myself to be like, well, no, like I'm gonna branch out of my comfort zone of being a surly dwarf, and
Mhm.
I'm actually gonna play a type of character that I've always like. Not that I dislike elves, I've just never taken them seriously,
Mhm.
you know? Like, and it's funny to say that because, I am an artist, but I've always felt like elves are too artsy fartsy to be adventurers in the world.
Mhm.
Like they're
Hoity-toity, uptight, yeah.
hoity-toity and uptight, but also, I don't know, like elves also just with their lithe, agile natures and their when you look at someone like, the Lord of the Rings elves, right? They're very pale, they have fine skin and they seem fragile to me. And
Mm.
it's never been something that I've been interested in because well, like I said earlier, with the first character I ever created being like a barrel chested kind of, stereotypical hero, you know,
Mm.
character. Like I've always wanted to have that sort of power fantasy, and elves just have never been the the race that I would be like, man, I really want to be an elf because that seems powerful,
Mm.
right? Elves don't seem strong and powerful to me. They're I
They
don't know.
always have, and especially in tabletops, even outside of Dungeons and Dragons, anything involving elves, they usually give them more of a magical focus, and they even
Hmm.
give them lower HP and all of that. And
Right.
like so that's just been like a thing that's been ingrained, I feel. Um and I can just go back to the thing of like, well, I want to play an elf, but I want to be like the opposite of the stereotype. I want to be this big, huge, hulking muscle himbo elf and like just be like God's gift to man and like all that and take like the orc racial traits, but other than just you're an elf. I find that would be hilarious, and I would let people do that. I mean, that's just me as a DM being open-minded, and also
Yeah, and I
just
would
funny
too.
to break those types of molds and to allow those options. Likewise, you could just be like, well, you can put your stats in there, like we talked about before, and yes, you could also do it that way if you want to be like by the book. Um, but I'm never someone who likes to go like by book standards usually. I find it easier to use them as a guideline as much as possible. Though if I find it to where there's something that I can't do and like myself or somebody else would like to be able to do it, I find a way to work it as fairly as possible because like people can homebrew shit and make it broken as hell and like
Yeah.
I don't want that to happen, but I also don't want to discount somebody's idea that they have. Like, I will try to reason with it and I will try to make it work, but I don't want to just like tell someone no, usually. Because like that can be the difference between like someone playing a great character that they have a lot of energy in and someone playing a character that they're less caring about.
Right.
Um,
It's funny, like I bring up that elf thing, and I definitely think that that particular character that I was talking about is one of the characters whose backstory I'm most proud of,
hmm,
but his backstory isn't even his backstory. That character's backstory is actually how his parents met. It's like warring tribes of sun elves and moon elves who were in conflict against each other, and his parents had this Romeo and Juliet kind of. They didn't kill themselves. Spoilers, I guess, for a 600-year-old play, but they were kind of like rival factions, and these two people came together. When I play that character, every time I play him, depending on who the party is and whatever, his personality always changes, and his views in the world and his goals and stuff always change. But because the backstory isn't about him, right? The backstory that I have
hmm.
for that character is about his parents, so it allows me to kind of like, yeah, I want to play the fighting wizard kind of, magic sword person in this group, and I can take that character and fit it in. So I don't have any like
Mm.
strong attachments to the personality of the character because it
Mm.
constantly is changing. But I definitely have fun with the character and trying to like play like a really good kind of elf character
Mm.
because it is atypical for like what I would normally do. And I don't think, again, like, I as a DM I would never tell someone like, "Oh, you can't why would you just do something like right and whatever." Like, you want to do what you want to do, right? And that's
Mm.
cool. Cuz I think it's one of those things of like you always want to do what is appropriate for you. And I think one of the reasons why like I'm really interested to see how they're changing character creation and how you stat out a character and all that is like, for me, having those particular um general racial traits is always something that, like, it's like, oh, if I really want to play a sorcerer, this time around, like, well, what's a charismatic race that I can like pick to be a sorcerer? And then it's like, well, okay, I haven't played a whatever, like a dragonborn. Like, I haven't played a
Mm.
dragonborn, and I want to be a sorcerer. And, well, okay, they get strength. Okay, that's cool, but they get charisma. So I'm gonna play a strong sorcerer dragonborn, and I get to like dive into those
Mm.
things. So I don't know. I guess there's pros and cons to everything, and I'm really interested to see this new kind of racial system to see whether or not it will affect my interest in some things, because
I
I don't
f-
know if I'm the kind of player that wants that kind of
mm.
open, just do whatever you want, right? Because
Mm.
then I know, like, I fear that I'll just be like, okay, well, this time I'm a really lithe, nimble dwarf, and this time I'm a really charismatic dwarf, and this time I'm a really intelligent dwarf, and I'd always just be a dwarf because I like talking like this, when I'm like, right, don't do that. Go get me another ale. Like, I just like that voice, and I like being surly,
Mm.
because I'm a people pleaser in real life, and like being going into D&D and being just a brash, like, fuck you kind of dwarf is just fun.
Mm.
Get some of those like social anxieties, like, work them out or whatever. But like, yeah, I don't know. It seems like you had something to add to that.
I was gonna say I feel that it'll make it more interesting, if anything, because like I said before, people have kind of just been like off the record being like, yeah, you could do that, no big deal, for years already. Whether it's like 3.5 or 5e or Pathfinder or any other tabletop, like there's always those DMs that are like, yeah, that's fine, no big deal, swap it. Like we'll just say you're this. I think, like you said, without doing that, you've gotten all these ideas and inspiration. I feel that in us doing it, you can still do whatever races you want to do and not have to swap it out and just find things that work beyond that rule. But the
Hmm.
alternative ruling can also help people on the other side branch themselves out because they'll be able to play like a different race that they normally would be like, well, they don't get anything that I like to use in a class, But now they'll be like, oh,
Right.
now I can be that orc wizard that I've wanted to be because that's like an option that's in an alternate ruling now, that they can see and read about. So I feel that it will work both ways. I don't think it's going to actually deter anyone from doing it at all. And the only people that would be like just people who are more purists to the system, who are like,
Right.
oh, PHP in one or two books only, that type of DM.
Yeah.
Whereas other DMs will just be like, yeah, I don't give a fuck. Like,
Yeah, like, for me, everything's on the table. Like, I'll play test
mm,
every just like whatever, just play whatever
mm,
you want. But, so this comes up. So I think this leads in very nicely to the next thing that I was gonna ask, which is, I think, maybe I don't know how big of a topic this will be, but I think there's potential for a conversation here. When it comes to doing whatever the hell you want to do, right?
Mm,
And it doesn't matter like what the book says. If you want to be a strong elf, be a strong elf. If you want to be a smart orc, be a smart orc. At what point do you think it's like at what point do you say fuck D&D, let's go find a different system? Because there's a lot of specificity to Dungeons and Dragons, right?
mm,
When you're a fighter, and that means something, right? That means you're going to get second wind, that means you're going to get action surge, that means you're going to have to pick a
mm,
specific subclass, and those subclasses are going to get very specific things, right?
mm,
I'm currently playing a Mutants and Masterminds campaign with the Heroes Approved folks,
mm,
and that is a system where there are no classes, there are no races,
mm.
and anything that you want to do is on the table because you can literally do whatever the fuck you want, you know so what is the dichotomy between having a game where there are a set of building blocks that are very specific to like a class or a character versus a system of building blocks that allow you to do just whatever you want, like, you know what I mean? Like, if we start, I guess a better way to phrase it is separating things like racial stats and all that from like races in D&D, at what point does it stop being D&D?
I mean, as long as it follows the lore of D&D and it's still doing the original ideal behind it, just because some mechanics can switch rulings between things, I don't think really makes it no longer D&D. I think D&D has built itself because it's the most visible of tabletops throughout the years, and it's also, infamous for the Satanic Panic. So it's literally just the first thing that comes to a lot of people's mind when you mention a tabletop role-playing game. They're, oh, like Dungeons and Dragons? Yeah, exactly. And those people have never played Dungeons and Dragons, but they know the name. So
Right.
it's like it started the brand. And it sucks because there's things that were before it, there's different systems, there's different worlds and lore, different styles that aren't just fantasy, that are amazing, and they just don't get the notoriety. I think a lot of groups will not usually branch out because they don't want to try and learn a new system again.
Mm-hmm.
um because it can be embarrassing for people. It can be like they don't want people to see them struggling. They just want to be able to do something and go with it.
Right.
I was like that for a while, and that's why I didn't even want to try 5th edition for a while. And I was embarrassed when I started playing 5th edition because I would mix up a lot of rules with 3.5, and I still do. I'll get
Mm-hmm.
things mixed up. Like, I'm not perfect. Um and it is embarrassing because like a lot of people are like, nobody plays 3.5 anymore, like why would you mix that up, like we only play 5th edition. And it's like, well, you do, but like I still play these other systems and think about it,
Yeah.
and like it's not going to go away. It's how I learned. So it's just something that I've had to just deal with, because that's going to happen even in, like, I've played systems that aren't D&D and I still get D&D rules like in there. It's just what you were initially exposed to. It kind of um sets the precedent on what you look for. Like, I don't know how many times I was in a campaign, a one shot recently on Defenders of Kobold on Twitch, and it wasn't a D&D system. It was like a DCC, I think. It was a style of Dungeon Crawl Classics under Dark Trails, I think they called it. Um, and there was a couple of points we were like, "Hey, do we get an opportunity attack?" And they're like, "No, that doesn't exist in this." But there was even the DM Chuck was like, is there an attack of opportunity in this?" Like, even him, who normally doesn't play D&D that much anymore, he likes to go outside of to different systems, and I've actually
Yeah.
enjoyed going to these new systems too because they're more fatal. They're like exponentially more fatal, and I know we've been lucky in the one shots I've been doing where we're not often dying, but like it is very common and very likely to happen in the systems that we're running now. And I think it makes the risk to reward a lot better than standard D&D. And I found that doing standard D&D as well, the risk to rewards usually not equivalent. Regardless if it's one way or another.
Yeah.
But I found that like struggling to survive through basic fantasy RPG and then like surviving and like not even leveling up after a couple of sessions, just like this zero level struggle bus is really fulfilling because like you don't necessarily get connected to the character because you're ready for that character to drop dead at one dice roll. You know, all it
Yep.
takes is one dice. And you're like, I don't care. But then that character lives and like that character levels up and that character keeps freaking surviving somehow. And you don't even get close to the character. You're just like, holy shit, I'm still going. Like, you're just excited that you're like,
Alive.
yeah, you're still pushing and like
Yeah.
growing the character. And I found myself not even caring about what character I want to build because it's just like it's going to build itself as I go. Like, and I normally
Mhm.
don't think that way with a D&D character. Whenever I did a D&D character, I thought like, what do I want to do? And then how do I get there? You
Right.
know? Like what do I want to like I'll think of what I want to do in the beginning, like coming out the gate, what do I want to do? And I also think what do I want to do at level 20? Even though I know we won't go to level 20 ever. It's highly unlikely. What do I want to be able to do by level 20? Okay, how do I get there? Figure it out. BFRPG, like friggin' Osrin, I think not Osrin, Osric is another one that's similar to BFRPG, like DCC, all that. It's just like, oh, I leveled up and I pick a class now. What? Oh, I'll do this, and then like you just keep going, and then it's just surprise. And you just end up with this build that you would probably not even think about because you were just too busy trying to live. And I find that hilarious. I found it
So
very enjoyable.
it sounds to me like from that perspective, right, of your D&D perspective on role playing, um character building anyway, where you have like an end goal in mind, like what do I want to be able to do when I'm level 20,
Hmm.
and then building a character towards that. I feel like you would have a lot of fun doing mutants and masterminds.
I was watching you go through all of those, and I was sitting there like chomping at the bit, being like, I want to play this because I've wanted to do a good like superhero type thing for a while. And just hearing you talk about it and watch you go through the mechanics in the streams, because I'd be lurking a lot in them and didn't say anything half the time because I'd be doing other things. And I was just forgot to like remind, like let you know I was there in the chat, and I'd just be listening. And like, there's so much shit that sounds so cool to do in that. That I really do want to do a mutants and mastermind thing as a player at some point. I'm happy that I got into something similar. And if you haven't heard of this one, you really should look into it. It's called Spectaculars.
I have not
Um,
heard of that.
it is hilariously good. It's very open-ended. You don't have to worry about too many stats. It was so simple that I did not know how to make a character because it was that simple. I was lost because I'm so used to having to like have all these things in order and look all this shit up, and I couldn't find anything. And they're like, "Nah, just like do whatever you want to do, dude." It's very open-ended. You don't need skills for like whatever. It's just all there for you. And yeah, we're gonna do
Yeah,
that this Wednesday, actually, on Defenders of Kobold on
that's cool.
Twitch. So I would say check it out if you want to just see what's like play style wise. But I had a blast last time. So,
Hmm. You'll have to look that up for sure. Um, I mean, I've played other similar sort of um, right. I guess played is the wrong. I have almost played. It's been a while, but there was a couple of times with an old group of people who I no longer even talk to because of just personal fallout issues. But
mm,
there was a time when we were looking at games like Fate, like Fate Core as a
mm-hmm,
thing. And I want to say, and I could be wrong, but I want to say like Fate is a system sort of where like you kind of just say what you want your character to be, and it is. Like again, like when I was like looking through those books, and I was just like, what are the mechanics of this? Like, what? Like, how do I do things in this game? And it's just like, well, you write it on your sheet and then you do it. You're like, what? So, like, I don't know. Like, I'm definitely interested in those games because, like, for me, right? You say you want to play like a superhero game, and yeah, Mutants and Masterminds perfect for superheroes because that's like what the game is like. That's what the coat it's wearing. Like that's the outfit. The rules, like the mechanics are wearing, is superheroes and stuff. But like that system in general is like so open in what you want to do, right? And how you can build a character. It's like we're playing a fantasy western campaign with like cybernetic enhancement. We're not playing
mm-hmm.
superheroes. We're not like masked vigilantes in the game that we're using those mechanics in. And
Right.
what I really love about that system is like if you have like a cool setting or whatever, you can build a character fit for that setting, right? There are
Mm,
so many times when like I'm on a forum or whatever where people are like, I really want to play like a Star Wars game. Can somebody help me um you know mod D&D to play Star Wars? And I always have two thoughts when it comes to that, or I guess three thoughts. One, two thoughts, and a sub. Anyway, the two main thoughts that I have when doing that is like a why have it, especially when it's like a big thing like Star Wars that you want to play, like a name like Star Wars, like an actual franchise. The first thing that comes to mind is like, why haven't you Googled Star Wars RPG, like Star Wars tabletop game? Because I know they make them, and I know that there's even like a D20 system for Star Wars. Why are you trying to mod a game that isn't intended to be one thing for something else? Like I want to play a 1940s detective game, but I want to use D&D rules. Like why? Like why don't you just look up something else, right? And then the other thing that comes to mind is because I'm such a Mutants and Masterminds stan, is why don't you just play Mutants and Masterminds? You can do whatever the fuck you want in that game. You want to be a fucking dude who can has telekinesis and force pull and force push things and like mind control people and have a laser sword. You can do that in Mutants. You can be a Jedi if you want to be. Like I don't know. I like those open ended systems, and maybe it's something where like I came from a background of like one week we'd be playing D&D, the next week we'd be playing All Flesh Must Be Eaten, the week after that we'd be playing Seventh Sea or Legend of the Five Rings or Scion or whatever, right? Where maybe I'm just having played 5th edition since it was D&D next in playtesting, and this campaign that I'm doing now in 2021 with Mutants and Masterminds is the first time since 5th edition came out that I've played anything other than 5th edition. Maybe that's why I'm like just super into it, but like
mm.
I don't know, like I really like these open-ended systems, and like kind of like just getting back to like at what point does D&D stop being D&D? I'm kind of over it, you know? I still really like the system, but like I think moving forward I'm just going to be much more into the world building and coming like and just playing like probably either mutants and masterminds or some other open-ended system where you're not like pigeonholed into a class and
Right.
trying to play that game of Jenga or jigsawing together like fragments of classes to try and play what you want to play,
Mm.
you know.
That's why I always had like an express interest in wanting to try GURPS. But every time I mention GURPS, which is a generic universal role playing system, people kind of hiss at it because it's like you think 3.5 is bad. GURPS is so much worse, with how much content there is to sift through and all of that. Just asinine amounts, ridiculous. And I've always wanted to do it, but never could because I never knew enough people that were willing and able and knowledgeable enough to run GURPS. Um, but Mutants Mastermind, especially just seeing, like I said earlier, watching you go through it and discuss it and seeing you guys even play it, it seems like it goes so smoothly and it's really simple to just like look something up and go and like find an answer or to anything like that. Anytime you guys had questions on stream when I was watching, it was solved in like literally less than a minute. And that was what stuck out to me, is that there wasn't just that 5 to 10 minute lull of everyone looking up and arguing and trying to figure out what was
Mhm.
right, and just boom, here it is. All right, cool, let's keep going. And it just kept everything so streamlined. And what really caught my attention the most, that made me want to like play it at that point, it like solidified my
Yeah.
decision.
Well, that's the thing about mutants and masterminds, you know. So the whole system is built on checks and balances. That is, I don't know if it's intended like this for even playing the game, but like the like building characters and everything is all checks and balances, right? Like there's something called a power level. Instead of having characters of a certain level and like being able in a campaign to be like, oh no, like Jerry is level 3 and Kyle's level 4 now, right? That doesn't happen in Mutants and Masterminds. The whole campaign is built on a power level, right? So everybody's power level 6, and you get a power point or a experience point, whatever you want to call it, for showing up to games. Like every session you
Mm,
show up to a game, you get a power point, and then you get power points for every like certain other things too.
mm,
Um, but what ends up happening is like, yeah, one character may be in air quotes more powerful because they have more skills or they have more weapons or they have more powers, but they're not any more powerful than anybody else because they're all based on the same checks and balances at the same power level. So I
mm.
may have 7 powers that I can do, and you may only have 3 powers that you can do.
But I have
But
mine pumped into like 4 different times.
well, not even that, just like you may have missed a couple sessions, so you don't have as many
Mm,
power points in your character, right?
yeah.
And so I may have more individual powers, but that doesn't like we're still again we're still facing the same checks and balances, right?
Mm,
So like your attack and your damage, when you add your attack bonus with your damage bonus together, they can't be more than twice the power level. So if you're at power level 10, you can have an attack bonus of 10 and you can have a damage bonus of 10, or you could have an attack bonus of 20 and a damage bonus of 0, or vice versa, and anywhere in between. But just because I've been at more sessions and have more experience points and have, put more points into my character, I still like, I can't have like an attack of 23, like we're still at the same, checks and balances. I just might have another gun that I can use now. And a
mm,
lot of the times you're going to have to choose one thing anyway. It's not like you can use all of your powers and skills at the same time. So
mm.
at the end of the day, like even if I have more variety, it's not like I'm any better than anybody else, which I really really like. But We are actually running towards the end of our time here. One thing I want to say, so it's on the record. I actually looked up GURPS. I'm on the website right now. If you want to play GURPS, you get a group together, I'll play it. I think if it is the universal role playing system, if we come up with a cool setting, and we can do, setting first kind of role playing, where like, okay, yeah, I want to make a 1940s noir detective, and that's what I'm gonna play, and then just focus in and make that character, because it's diegetic to the world.
Hmm.
I think that's probably a really good way to approach a very robust system like GURPS.
Yeah, the another thought I've been wanting to do is like I took inspiration from you, and like I've been talking to some people on the side about doing the Dawn of Worlds and
Mm-hmm.
creating a world, because I really liked what you did, and I
That is fun.
honestly wanted to run that system and try and build our own world with other people and see what kind of shit we can come up with. Maybe if I mention that I have someone willing to run it, then I
Sure.
could get you in on there too. Because I talked to you about, yeah, I did talk to you about helping
Yep.
us do it. So, yeah, I mean, I
I
could
mean,
probably easily get a couple of people.
it's super easy, and if all it takes to like get someone into, like, actually get into a session to like do it, if all it takes is to have someone who's done it before be there, cool. But I am here to tell you that Dawn of Worlds is a free 12-page PDF. It's
Oh, I know, I
not
have it.
hard.
I have
It's
it. I
not
looked it
hard
over.
at all to
I'm just I'm just very stupid in my first excursion into anything new to me. I'm so insecure that I just need to be handheld that
That's
first
fair. No,
experience
yeah.
so I don't mess it
I
up.
also
And
just
then I
like
can always go from
it's
there.
you know, I just like playing that game. Like, I like world building, so playing that game is really fun for
Yeah,
me.
it
So
sounded like a
yeah,
blast. So,
yeah. But yeah, it's been great talking with you, Dion. Before we like, hit the stop record button, you have any last thoughts? Anything you want to like say specific to the audience? Is there any last
yeah.
things you want to get off your chest?
Yeah, sure. I mean, first, if again, I'm Dion Westford. You can find me on Twitch under the name Substances Used, SubstanceUsed. Uh, I stream gaming. I might eventually do tabletop on there, but I'm not brave enough to get into overlays yet and to deal with that. I also am in a bunch of various tabletop games through Twitch, mostly right now on Defenders of Kobold, but soon to be in other areas too. But that's a secret. And finally, I guess the last thing, other than saying thank you for having me on here and on this podcast, is to the audience, I love you.
Me too. We love you, audience.
I fucking love you.
And I'll just say to specifically to the audience, um, if you skipped over the ads or whatever, I just want to say just one last plug for my Patreon. $1 and up on patreon.com/Folsham_art. I've added a new benefit recently,
Mm.
where if you are a $1 subscriber on Patreon, you can submit questions for us to answer at the end of these shows. So
Ooh.
instead of just the last thoughts at the end of a podcast, I'd like to do viewer submitted questions and have the guest like look through the list of questions and pick out one or two that they'd be like interested in answering.
Mm.
And we'll just spend like a quick, little feedback session or something at the end of these shows. Um,
Nice.
but yeah, I mean, you can go to the Patreon and see all the other rewards. There's so much more that you get than just being able to submit a question for $1 a month, and there's other tiers too. But
Yeah, as one of
that
your
is specific
legendary
to the podcast.
As one of your legendary subscribers to your Patreon, I can confirm there's a lot of cool shit that you get, and it's very worth it, and you should do it.
Well, thank you for that. But yeah, you know, it's something where even just $1 a month, you get like some pretty cool access to various things like a blog, a web comic, and now the ability to submit questions to this podcast. Anyway, that's going to be it for us here at Thought Balloons. Thank you again, Dion, for being here. And
Thank
for
you.
everybody else out there, we love you and
We
have a
do.
week.
Yeah.